Okay, before we get started, can someone just verify for sanity that we are audible? Anyone there? Yes. We have a yes. Audible, but only out of the left ear. That is true. Okay, I may not. Let me check real quick and see if I can fix the stereo thing. I'm not sure I'll be able to. Test. Test. Is that better? Okay, I think that should be fixed it. That should be fixed it. That's not grammatically correct, but oh well. Okay, good. Okay, well, let's get started. I almost pressed stop streaming. Okay. Hello.
Hi.
So, my name is Richard Bobo.
I'm Brett Newton.
And we are here in the bustling metropolis of Johnson, Arkansas, with what we believe to be the largest assemblage of bassoon family instruments ever. So,
yeah, at least the most diverse collection of bassoons, the most different sizes that have ever been in one place.
Yeah, and that's really what we're going to be focusing on day one of what we're calling Oonmoot, what we're calling the first annual Oonmoot, in case this happens again.
I think it should happen again because this has been fun.
Yeah, well, the only problem is, in order to be fair, next time it would have to be where you live, and driving the Subcontrabassoon across.
I mean, that's a logistical thing. It may have to be here locally. But yeah, no, I got up early this morning and I drove about 5 hours to get here, bringing several sizes of bassoon with me so that we can have the complete bassoon family in the first place for the first time in history.
And those, the instruments that haven't been assembled before, we went ahead and just made.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna get started, and we're just gonna introduce the instruments, and we're gonna go roughly in order of how crazy they are, or how common they are. And let's see if we can get our little slideshow going. And we're going to start with, the bassoon, right? Because that's what we're all, that's why we're all here. At some point, someone asked, or that's Brett and I, at some point we played bassoon, and then we started looking at the other instruments.
Yeah.
So, let's take a look at the bassoon.
Yeah, so we got my bassoon out.
Yes. Guttram Wolf would be proud because we have two of his instruments here. Brett's bassoon is actually a Wolf, or Wolf, or I don't know. I don't know how we're supposed to pronounce it in American English.
I don't think he would have minded, really.
Either way.
No, but yeah. So this is going to be your standard bassoon. As it says on the screen, this instrument is in the key of F. However, it is written and always has been in the key of C, so it is a non-transposing instrument. The reason we say it is in F is that the fundamental scale of the bassoon is in F. Well, rather, it's F Lydian, what we would call a hard scale, meaning that the fourth scale degree is raised. And all bassoons have this property.
Yes. Go ahead.
That's the fundamental scale of any bassoon, F Lydian, or a Lydian scale. The bassoon itself just happens to be pitched in F.
Yeah, so usually when we talk about woodwinds, we might say an alto sax and E flat. And that E flat is, when we just shorten it to N E flat, we're hiding two distinct things. The key the instrument is built in and the key the instrument is transposed in. It just so happens that on the alto sax, really all saxophones, all oboes, all flutes, and arguably all clarinets, those two notes are the same. The key that it's transposed in and the key that it's built in. On bassoon, there's a disconnect, and the reason we're stressing that right now is because it's going to become important when we start talking about some of the weirder sizes.
Yeah, so while everybody thinks of the bassoon as being a C instrument, because that's how it's written, and that's kind of how we think of it. You see a C, you play a C. C6 doesn't want to come out right now, but so you see a C, you hear a C, and that's how the bassoon works, except, that's not the fundamental pitch of the instrument. The fundamental pitch is F.
So for the most part, for today, we're going to be talking about the key the instrument is built in, not necessarily the key that it's written in. We have some ideas for tomorrow to discuss some details of notation and transposition, because Brett and I actually have some different opinions here. I know, amazingly enough, Brett and I do not agree on literally everything, just most important things.
Yeah. I think we should kind of stress how this idea came about. And it starts a year and a half ago, probably, on our... So Richard and I, November of 2019, a few months before the pandemic hit. Was that about right? Or was it before then? Or the road trip out to Lubbock?
Well, I mean, it would have to be before the pandemic.
Right. Was it 2019 or was it before then?
I feel like it was earlier than that, but I'm not entirely certain.
Anyway, Richard was driving out to Lubbock to pick up a sarrusophone. And he just happened to be driving through my hometown of Gainesville. And so I said, well, let me just hop on and we'll just drive together. Turns out it was probably a good idea because you avoided a snowstorm that way.
Yeah.
So in roughly, 10 hours in the car together, we started really talking about different sizes of bassoon. At this point, Richard's well on the way of having the Subcontrabassoon built. And I had in the back.
And by well on your way, you mean several years in, but several years away.
Right. I had in the back of my mind to expand the bassoon family. I'd done a video several years ago. It's, I think, my second most popular video on my channel called The Missing Bassoon. And so that kind of and we got talking during this, and we just started talking about the dearth of instruments within the bassoon family. How it used to not be that way back in the Renaissance. The Renaissance had this huge consort of dulcians, also called kirtles, depending on which area of Europe you lived in. Oh, look! A wild kirtle appears.
Believe it or not, we didn't plan that because, planning is work. And, he and I were both busy just trying to get all this straightened out. But yeah, this is a dulcian or a kirtle. It's an example of a Renaissance era bassoon.
These are in the same pitch.
They're in the same pitch. However, this only goes down to C. This is before these instruments were extended to low B flat.
So basically, everything from here up is an extension for the bassoon. In fact,
but you can already see the basic form factor of two parallel bores. Here they're drilled into one piece of wood, and on the bassoon they're drilled into 4 pieces of wood and then assembled together.
And the separation of the bassoon into multiple joints is really one of the defining characteristics between a dulcian or a curdle and the bassoon. In fact, what we've got here is a Baroque bassoon. This is a bassoon that would have been seen in the early 1700s. This happens to be a broken Baroque bassoon because it has no keys on it. So it's not currently playable, and the vocal's also spinning. But this is a little more advanced than the dulcian. Again, it is the same pitch as the bassoon. However, the big difference here is that the Baroque bassoon, this particular Baroque bassoon, is not pitched at A440, it is pitched at A415. So it's half a step lower. So you could think of it as actually being in E or B, depending on how you're thinking of the transposition.
But by this point, the more exotic sizes of bassoon had already kind of disappeared.
Right, so with the dulcians, you would have lots of different sizes. The bass, which is what Richard had, a tenor, an alto, a great bass, and rarely you'd see a contrabass or a descant. So on either side of that. So you'd have 5, 6 sizes of dulcian. In the Baroque era, you've got just the Baroque bassoon. There are, 3 or 4 surviving examples of Baroque contrabassoon. There's a
and they are terrifying looking, like 10 feet tall, have to be played at a 45-degree angle. I mean, you look at a stage with one of these Baroque, reproduction Baroque contrabassoons on it, and that's all you see.
Yeah, it looks like a piece of architecture. And it's not always a reproduction. If it's the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, it's an original instrument. It is the instrument that Handel used. You would also, in the Baroque era, have smaller bassoons as well. There's a few surviving examples.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit.
Right, but...
Yeah.
You've got them. There's a few surviving examples by Denner of both Tenoroons and octave bassoons.
So, are we ready to move on to the...
I think we can move on because there's not a lot to say about the bassoon itself.
Or there's so much to say about the bassoon that literal books have already been written on them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bassoon encyclopedia.
Yeah.
But let's get this one off screen here.
So, we did have one quick question. What is a moot? A moot is like a gathering. Brett and I are both Lord of the Rings fans, so we were thinking of the word Entmoot, a gathering of Ents that happens in the Two Towers. So big giant trees get together and discuss things. We thought, well, that's perfectly appropriate for bassoons.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an old English term.
Okay, so the next instrument, and the instrument I play the most often, at least professionally, is the Contrabassoon. So once again, there's not a whole lot to talk about on Contrabassoon that hasn't been covered elsewhere on my channel or on the internet. But as far as the relationship between the bassoon and the contrabassoon is 1 octave lower, also built in F. So if I play that, the 7-finger pitch that woodwinds usually use to think of the fundamental note. It's sounding a little sad today. Sorry, I haven't warmed up, but once again, there's that Lydian scale. So it's a contrabassoon. It plays down to towards the bottom of the piano, the low B flat 0. I think I might have actually grabbed the wrong reed. Okay. Anyway, yeah, so contrabassoon, pretty basic orchestra instrument at this point. Although sometimes in smaller orchestras, they're a little bit harder to come by.
Because, it is, of the standard orchestral woodwinds, it is the rarest by far. It is the most expensive. And that is a huge determining factor.
But both of these instruments, the bassoon and the contrabassoon, are instruments that you could write in orchestra and no one would really bat an eye. Likewise, even in band music, bassoons are standard. Contrabassoons
have been used in band music since the 1730s. So it's not like you'd be breaking any new ground adding a contrabassoon in.
Yeah. You just might have to accept the fact that it might not happen.
Yeah, it might not get played. It might be played on a different instrument. Oh, look, here's our inevitable contraforte question.
Yeah, so like we were talking about in the beginning, our main goal here is to talk about different sizes. Brett and I are both of the opinion that the contraforte is a very interesting variant of the contrabassoon. They're both built in the key of F. They both play in the same range. Their bore profiles are, I would argue, within the expected level of deviation that you might see, for example, between a French bassoon and a German bassoon, or between a historical bassoon and a more recent bassoon. So it's not that the contraforte is bad or that we're not thinking about it. We're just kind of including it underneath the umbrella of contrabassoon in this case.
Historically, if you look at contrabassoon developed, particularly contrabassoons before 1870 when Heckel came out with their model, this is a Heckel style contrabassoon. There was just, every maker had their own shape, own size of contrabassoon. And we kind of settled on this. And for me, Wolf's design is just a departure, much in the way you would see in those 19th century designs. Not necessarily superior, just different.
All right, you ready to move on?
Sure.
So here, from Mike is a bit quiet. We can bump that up a little bit. Is that better? Is that better? Test. Okay. We'll raise it a little bit at a time. From here, there's a huge gap in.
Common.
How common, really, how much of a real instrument it is.
Yeah, so you look at textbooks. Pretty much any textbook written on composing for bassoons is going to only talk about bassoon and contrabassoon, and it may have a footnote for one or two other instruments, and it talks about them as, they're there, but nobody uses them. And historically, no one has used sizes other than the bassoon and the contrabassoon. There are a few rare examples throughout music history. And what Richard has here is what I call a tenor bassoon, what a lot of people call tenoroons. And we will definitely talk more about the nomenclature on this.
But the way I might think about it is, if you choose to use the word tenoroon, it's just a contraction of tenor bassoon. We're as much fun as we might have talking about these instruments as Oons, as though Oon is the real name of the instrument. We both know that it's not. It's a bassoon. It's not an Oon. But it does make for some fun little whimsical words when you consider Oon the name of the instrument, hence the name of this gathering, Oonmoot. So, this is a Tenoroon. I recently made a fantastically crazy purchase of, this is my own Wolf Tenoroon. It's their FG5 model. I mean, it's obviously a real instrument, right? I mean, it exists. I purchased this off the shelf. This wasn't a special order, so why were we talking about how it's maybe not as real an instrument?
Well, before the mid-1990s, this basically didn't exist as
Do you mind if I grab your bassoon?
Oh, no, go ahead. It didn't exist as an instrument that was an option for really anybody. And then Guntram working with a bassoonist in England, decided they were going to start producing these smaller instruments to teach children. Europe has a real problem in music education getting bassoonists started. Their music education system is very different than ours in America.
Yeah, well, and bassoonists are at a disadvantage when getting started. I mean, you can start a flute player pretty young. You can't start. I mean, there are people who aren't physically large enough to play the bassoon until they're nearly adults.
Yeah.
And that is the main reason, or really the only reason these instruments are designed, is as a pedagogical tool to teach young bassoonists. And that has a lot of consequences in how the instrument is designed.
Yeah. And so it's designed to be kind of simplified. It's not designed with a professional in mind.
Specifically, it's tuned as though it's going to be played with a bassoon reed and with a sort of underdeveloped embouchure. So, as I got this instrument a little over a week ago, my biggest struggle has been working on reed making, trying to make a reed that's small enough to produce a more characteristic Tenoroon sound, so it doesn't just sound like a flabby bassoon, but it's also long enough so that it's not horribly sharp. And I'm still working on that, and the intonation is still leaves some to be desired, because I'm using this instrument for something it wasn't designed for, as an upper extension of the bassoon family, when it was instead designed as a pedagogical tool to teach bassoonists. Now, I do think there's potential for this instrument.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And in that potential, I included a part for Tenoroon in my Symphony 2. Technically, I also included it in Symphony 1, but we don't talk about Symphony 1 much because it's weird. Yeah, so I have written for that instrument in my Symphony 2, and in order to get the part played, and the recording is coming soon. Hopefully in another month or so I'll have the recording fully finished. But I went ahead and I rented a Tenoroon, and I played the part myself. In fact, I rented this Tenoroon. And herein we get to the Tenoroon problem. There's two of them. Richard's Tenoroon is in the key of G. Well, it's actually in the key of C, meaning that, like we said on the bassoon, the contrabassoon, the fundamental scale is F Lydian. The fundamental scale of that instrument is C Lydian. G sticking?
Yeah, a little bit.
That's pretty standard.
Weather's going a little wonky.
This instrument, however, is in B flat.
Or it's built in B flat.
Transposes in F.
Yeah, so that creates some issues when if you're thinking about using these instruments in a series composition, because you don't really know which one may be available. The F is, the way I like to use it, just to avoid the whole is it in C or is it in G issue, is by calling them by the fourth higher or fifth higher. So this instrument over here is a fourth higher than bassoon. This one is a fifth higher than bassoon. The fourth higher instrument is much more common, But for some reasons we're probably going to get more into tomorrow, Brett and I both think there's more potential for a G or for a fifth higher instrument as a upward extension of the bassoon family for professionals. That sound about right?
Yeah. So, and yeah, the intonation on this instrument is not great, and I remember that when I recorded the part. Yeah, this is just a regular bassoon reed that I'm using on here, whereas Richard's using a special made Tenoroon reed.
Yeah, seeing how I actually made a Tenoroon shaper, I figured I might as well get to use it. It maybe wasn't the perfect shape. I probably could have made it a little bit wider, because this one's a little bit narrow and it tends on the high side. Okay, so is that...
I think that's it for now on Tenoroon.
So now we're about to take another leap into the less common and talk about the instrument that Brett absolutely hates being called Altoon, and I love calling it the Altoon.
Altoon just sounds wrong. Honestly.
Okay. And right off the bat, we want to thank Vocal Majority
Absolutely.
for graciously loaning us an Altoon, an Alto bassoon, whatever you want to call it. Now this is in the key of F, just like a bassoon. It's one full octave above the bassoon. And just like the Tenoroon, its primary function is as a pedagogical tool for really quite young children.
I think they've started kids as young as 3.5.
Yeah, that is what it says on the Wolf website, 3.5.
And I've seen kids that young holding these before, and it doesn't look ridiculous.
Now this one has pretty simplified key work. You might notice that it only has 3 keys for the thumb instead of, bassoonists, we're used to, what, 40?
No, this one only has 2
47?
keys for the thumb.
Oh, yeah, sorry, 2 keys and 1 tone hole. But it does have a range down to that lowest B flat. You can really start to tell that these instruments are not designed as... It's not like a piccolo and a flute, where the piccolo is designed as a professional instrument. These are built for different functions, and I think the Altoon for both Brett and I kind of exceeds, at least the current designs, what you might be able to use in a performance situation.
Right, and the instrument as it exists it's limited. Were it fitted with full key work,
and Wolf does have an Altoon. Now, all of these instruments have wildly inconsistent names. If almost every maker that makes them calls them something different. But the instrument that's an octave above the bassoon, sometimes called the octave bassoon.
Yeah, the other word that we don't know if we'll get demonetized or not.
Yeah, that's. So Wolf does make them with more key work, and I've played one. I have played a Wolf Altoon with the register keys and that.
Did
stuff.
it have the low B and C sharp?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a more recent development. When they first came out with them,
Sorry.
when they first came out with them, they offered the 2 models: the FG8-5, which is this one here, and the FG8-8. The 8 had 3 additional keys to this one, so it had an octave vent, it had a C sharp key, and it had a thumb B flat.
This one doesn't have an octave key. So really, you're limited to about 2 octaves tops.
I can get up to a high G on there.
I'm gonna. All right.
So on here you have to use Baroque bassoon fingerings. And that's a written high G, sounding the G above the treble clef, just the space above the treble clef. And that's about as well. I can get an A flat.
And yes, Martin or Martine, it is a lot like quarter size or eighth size violins. The big difference is because we're dealing with air columns. When you make it smaller, the pitch has to change. You can actually small size violins are usually tuned the same as a regular violin. It's just less resonant because the strings are thicker and less. Under less tension in order to play the lower notes, because at least for humans, if we're playing in air that humans can breathe, when you make the instrument half the size, it has to get an octave higher.
Yeah, and that's just, and the problem with wind instruments, the higher they go, the more difficult they become because everything gets smaller and it gets more pressure. Just more difficult in general.
So, and I think tomorrow we're going to talk a little more about maybe what potential we see, or how much potential we might see in some of these less common instruments. But for now, let's move on to. So we've officially exceeded with the Altoon, we've exceeded the instruments that you can actually buy. But we still have several instruments left. So the bassoon, the Tenoroon, and the Altoon, we've gotten into the kind of the half octave pattern that we're used to with woodwinds, right? Saxophones are built roughly a half octave apart. You can find the main species of clarinets are about a half octave apart. There are flutes that are about a half octave apart, sometimes a fourth, sometimes a fifth. But there wasn't, at least in the modern era, there hasn't been an instrument between the bassoon and the contrabassoon, because remember there was a full octave below the bassoon and the contrabassoon, and that's where Brett comes in.
So instruments between the bassoon and the contrabassoon have existed in the past. They never really had a standardized name. So Richard and I kind of came up with the idea of calling it a great bassoon. And I think that really kind of stems from that road trip where we, great bass was always probably going to be in there, I think.
I need to look it up, because you've been thinking of this idea for a long time.
Yeah.
In fact, the first time we spoke, you contacted me to do kind of like a miniature interview for your blog about the Subcontrabassoon project, and you brought up the idea of an instrument between here, and I'm wondering what if that name came up in that conversation as well.
I don't think it did.
We might have to look that up.
I might have to.
Okay.
I think we at least settled on it being a single word instead of great bass bassoon, which does get to be a mouthful.
Or what I would consider even worse, great bassoon. If you split the words up, you're no longer parsing it as a size of bassoon. You're parsing it as a quality of bassoon.
Right.
And this is also something we're going to get into tomorrow when we get into nomenclature and spaces all of a sudden become important.
Yes. So what we've got here is the prototype of Great Bassoon. Unfortunately, it is not going to be able to play today. I keep hitting the fan. Okay, so when the instrument's 6 feet 8 inches tall, a little over 2 meters tall, and you live in the South, hitting the ceiling fan is inevitable. As you can see, well, it doesn't fit into the screen. Let me see if I can back up some. Not hit any of the Oons. So, yeah, this is the Greatbassoon. Again, historically, these instruments have existed. The last that I have been able to confirm was built was about 1850. It was made in London by the maker Sam, S-A-M-M-E. It's pitched, and now this instrument is pitched in C, meaning the fundamental scale is the C Lydian scale. It is 1 octave lower than the Tenoroon here, the Tenoroon in G or C. And initially when I first came up with the idea, I thought about putting it in F. Makes sense, right? Bassoon's in C, then the next one should be in F. Richard is the person who convinced me that, no, it needs to be in G.
Well, I don't think I use the word "it needs to be." I tend to be a little more diplomatic.
Yeah.
I think I probably put it in several layers of, well, if it were up to me, I would definitely move towards putting it in C, but of course I'm not the one to do blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, yeah. And so Richard, being the diplomatic person that he is, basically is the reason that we did ultimately decide to put this in the key of C. Which of course makes sense.
But historically, they were built in both C
yes.
and B flat, which creates a horrible problem because the way they used to refer to these instruments was the quint bassoon, which was a fifth lower in B flat, or the quart bassoon, which was a fourth lower in C. Unfortunately, they also use those exact same terms to describe tenoroons that were a fourth or a fifth higher. So if you just came across the word quint bassoon, you didn't know if you were talking about a great bassoon in B flat or a tenoroon in C.
So basically, the two instruments that I have in my hands here are both quart bassoons. This is a fourth higher. This is a fourth lower. I got it.
Sorry, that just...
The one thing I left at home back in Texas is the floor peg for the great bassoon, and I don't need it. We're good. So we got two different.
You know, having said that, if something goes horribly wrong, it's going to get clipped, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They're gonna take you saying it'll be fine, and then immediately cut to something going wrong.
Yeah, that's exact. Luckily, pretty much every piece on here is not the final version. There will be more. Everything here is going to get reprinted except the bell. The bell is a final version. But yeah, so this is. These instruments have existed. They go all the way back to the early dulcians in the Renaissance era. They were called great bass dulcians. Well, you could also call them quart bass or quint bass. And then you would see some classical instruments in this pitch, as well as early romantic instruments in this pitch. This is the first modern iteration in 170 years, as far as we can tell.
Yeah, and it's a prototype. It's in active development, and new instruments are being built.
Yeah. It's kind of exciting that new instruments are being built. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of new instrument development in the last.
Well, especially double reed.
Yeah, double reed developers are highly conservative.
Well, yeah, and there's just so much less economy of scale that
yes.
you can, like saxophones. Almost any weird saxophone you can think of, there's 20 people that will buy it. Weird bassoons, maybe not quite that much. So there's a good reason to be a little more selective on, building a new instrument.
Yeah.
Building a new double reed instrument.
Right. Good case in point is the heckelphone. Most people know about the heckelphone, but few people know that there's probably only about 75 working examples in the world. Yeah,
there's probably more orchestration textbooks that mention the heckelphone than there are playable heckelphones.
And that's orchestration textbooks just by different authors.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not a common instrument at all, but it exists, and with orchestration books talking about it, you see it brought up every now and then. Okay,
so let's move on to what you've all been waiting for. All right, if you've subscribed to this channel, there's only one thing that interests you: the Sopranoon. Okay, so this is what happens when you're talking late at night and you're talking about what's going to happen during this Oonmoot, and you just say, you know what, it would be silly if I 3D printed a Soprano instrument just as a joke to finish out the Oonmoot. And of course then I ended up printing like 6 revisions of this darn thing, and it's almost in tune. Now it doesn't sound that great because, I mean, this is still the first read that's ever been made for one. But it is, you know, broadly functional. It doesn't have any key work right now, so all of the keys that are not covered directly by a finger are covered with tape. And I've done one little cheat, which is as I've moved the what would be the low D key, I've moved it to a tone hole for the left pinky, so I can play a full scale down to what would be the low C on bassoon, which is the low G on Sopranoon, or in Brett's nomenclature, soprano bassoon.
So the soprano is 1 full octave higher than the Tenoroon in C, and 2 octaves higher than the Greatbassoon.
It's blending. It's the same color as the big ominous blob behind us.
Yeah. Yeah. So
anyway, this thing actually ended up turning out much better than I thought it would. So I don't know if my standards are getting lower or
I've been pleasantly surprised with everything you've posted on it.
Yeah, that highest note is
it's more in tune and better sounding than the alto.
Well, this does actually, believe it or not, I did put an octave vent here. Yeah, I don't know why that fingering works, but it does.
What note is that?
I think when I checked it with the tuner, it was B flat 7.
Ow.
Yeah, luckily you can't play chromatically up that note, so it's pretty much useless. But yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this thing for me as a composer, it's like, well, that just came out way better than it should have.
Yeah, and
I said it to a friend of mine who's a professional commercial orchestra. He's like, I really like that.
Yeah. So honestly, I'm actually thinking about using this in a recital because I have a piece that's, you know, plaintive and would work well in an upper register and isn't very. It doesn't have a large range, but it's still hard for me to look at this and not see the joke I originally intended it to be.
Yeah, when you make a joke and then the joke turns out to not be funny, and the joke is like, oh, that's actually a real thing.
Yeah. So next,
historically though, there have been instruments of this size from the Dulcian family, the descant Dulcian. Well, it wouldn't have been in C. It probably would have been in D. Actually, a step higher. But more or less, this is not a historically inaccurate instrument.
So, since, let's face it, I failed. I tried to make a joke, and I failed. So, I had to try again. This is where Brett groans.
I'm not groaning. I'm thinking what everybody else is thinking at this point.
Okay, so this is what I would call the Piccoloon. I think what Brett would prefer to call the Sopranino bassoon. This is 2 full octaves above the bassoon, an octave above the Altoon. Matt Miller, I usually use Inventor for designing. It's just the program I'm most comfortable with, Autodesk Inventor. Yeah, so this is, now the Sopranoon, the basic scale is actually the same as an oboe. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4 is C4. The big difference is with the extra range of the bassoon, it goes down to the low F of below that.
So the second lowest note of an English horn. I tried to convince him to call it a bobo. B-O-B-O-E. It did not stick.
You know, funny story, that's exact. My sister was dead set. She wanted to play the oboe when she was in middle school. And then someone pointed out, oh, like your last name. She never considered it again. Oh. Anyway, so this has a fundamental scale, an F, which puts it in the same key as an F piccolo oboe, which they're just comically small. And you're taking that and you're folding it in half, so things just get really cramped and uncomfortable. And I haven't played this one probably since I made it, so who knows what's going to happen. The low C was amazingly perfectly in tune. Who knows? Yeah, but you might be able to see there'd be almost no way to put full chromatic key work, and that's really the limiting factor on some of these tiny instruments like the piccolo oboe, the piccolo clarinet. It's one thing to design something like a dulcian that's that small, that uses cross fingerings, or a Garkloon recorder, even a Sopranino recorder, a Soprano crumhorn, or Sopranino crumhorn, which I just have within arm's reach because of course I do. But for an instrument like a bassoon family instrument, if you can't fit it with full key work, it's really not going to be useful. Okay, so, but this is technically playable, right?
Yeah, you played it.
Yeah, so naturally, we have to go to what you cannot play. And I didn't make a fancy graphic for this because I didn't want to possibly mislead anyone into thinking this was a viable instrument. But this would be the size of I guess you could call it a Garkloon, an octave above the Soprano.
I never want to hear that word again.
Now, I also made it out of bright purple just to further.
I think you need to make them out of green now and call them gherkins.
Yeah, and you can see, like, this is literally physically too small to play. Yeah, like, it can't be done. It does have an octave vent. I don't think the vent does anything, and I don't have a reed that works with it, and even if I did, it wouldn't be playable, but this is the rough scale of what the instrument 2.5 octaves above the bassoon would be.
To give you an idea, this is the same fundamental scale as the piccolo. So...
And this is 3 full octaves above the bassoon.
Why? Nobody knows.
And you really run out of names, right? I mean, like, once you've gone from Piccoloon to Garkloon to...
Well, that's why I would go Sopranino, then call that the piccolo, and then call that one stupid.
Yeah, but what's the point? But you have 2 stupid instruments. I kind of feel like the term piccolo is important enough. It should be reserved for something that's at least physically playable. Anyway, so no fancy overlays on these 2. These were just demonstrations of why these instruments are not viable. Now for the...
I believe we call this the elephant in the room.
Yeah, well, actually, there's one thing. There's one other instrument. So we've been going in half octaves, right?
Yeah.
So contrabassoon. Then what's a half octave below contrabassoon? Well, neither of us are really think that there's a reason to have an instrument down here.
No, and acoustically there's not a reason, because once you get down that low, a half octave is, on an organ you call that a resultant tone. You play two notes half octave apart, a perfect fifth apart, and they just result in an octave lower. So there's not a huge...
Someone asked for me to play it. There. I'm half covering like 4 tone holes because my fingers are too fat. I'll just try to mash everything down and see what happens. Yeah. That was actually an E5. So you could just use any of those like stubborn high E's that happen. You can just have one of these on hand. Just no, don't do that. No. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so yeah. Anyway, anything a half octave between El Monstro here and the contrabassoon is just not acoustically feasible for human ears.
Well, if it were the most extreme instrument available, it might be useful.
Yes. But at that point, if you've got the full elephant here, you don't need a half elephant.
Yeah, and I think the practicality argument's important, because once you're getting to this size, all of the instruments are going to be huge, cumbersome, and expensive. So you might as well go for the instrument that's huge, cumbersome, expensive, and a full octave gives you a full extra octave.
You want the most bang for your buck.
Now, so this should be... Now, I was up really late last night. In order to get this so I could play a few notes, the last piece finished printing at 4 a.m. Brett and I have goofed around with it a little bit. The limiting factor of playing around with it is we actually don't have any tape that'll seal the tone holes consistently. The tone holes are so wide that electrical tape doesn't provide a good seal, because you have to use multiple strips. So we were getting leaks.
We went through a whole roll of electrical tape.
Yeah, literally a whole roll of electrical tape. And we believe it or not, and I'm going to have to upload this as a separate upload, but we do have a recording of me playing an A-1 acoustically on Subcontrabassoon with a few caveats. This body joint here doesn't have tone holes yet. So these would be the tone holes for open F down to C sharp, so essentially the bassoon version of a wing joint. Okay. And this, you can't see, this is just a big column at this point. You can't see the shape of the instrument at all. This bocal is temporary. I 3D printed this out of plastic with some strategically placed brass inserts for strength and to accept the bocal. That's also where Brett's Greatbassoon bocal came from. His temporary Greatbassoon bocal. I also had to 3D print this tube. So if you can see,
I think it'd be easier if you turned it full 90 degrees, so you can see it real clearly through right here.
Okay. Yeah. So so there's this metal column, and then behind it there's this plastic tube. This is eventually going to be made out of metal. Right now, this is a very large, fragile piece that's made entirely out of plastic. So it's probably not going to hold up. Okay. So right now, we have the instrument set, so it should be able to play a low E. So that's E0, roughly 20 hertz. The larger tone holes weren't holding the tape and weren't holding the seal. So real quick, I'm going to just do a once over. Actually, I'm going to tease you all even longer and talk about what happened this morning. So I had finally, the plastic piece, the descending tube was finally printed and glued and dried, and I put it on the instrument, and it just wasn't producing anything. Like, I mean, I could get sounds to come out, but it wasn't the right octave. It felt like there was just a massive leak somewhere. I was actually worried that the taper was just too shallow, and that the whole design was fundamentally flawed, and was just never going to work with a bassoon style reed. And then I realized that I have a water vent down here to drain water from the descending tube, and I had forgot to cover that. So that's why it wasn't getting sound, or it wasn't getting the correct sound. Okay. Okay, this, well, it's the wrong height. Now, this is adjustable, but I'm not going to do that right now. Okay, so this should be a low E. E is 0, 20 hertz. Yeah, and the I don't know if you all can hear that, but with it right in my face, there's some leaking going on in the back of the reed, which is getting some gurgling. Okay.
I think you can do it again.
Okay, let's see if I can get a better start than that.
Yeah.
So I just want to give myself plenty of weasel room here. This is essentially like someone who built or designed their own contrabassoon reed, having never played contrabassoon, and then playing it live. So there's a lot of room for error. So like, I have no idea if this is the best reed design. I think there's some work that could be done to help it respond better. I know that I'm not well practiced at producing notes these low. So what
one is.
What I'm getting at is, I personally am still willing to entertain the possibility that the subcontrabassoon is not a viable instrument. But I don't think any difficulty that I experience in these first few weeks is going to be evidence of that, if that makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So, and right now the intonation, I literally just played the first few notes of this a little before noon. So there's still a lot of work to do to study the intonation, to figure out what might need to be changed. Right now, the instrument is overall a decent amount flat. Some notes more than others. So maybe that means the reed is too big. Maybe it means the vocal's the wrong length. Maybe it means that the formulas that I use to calculate the boundary layer effects were never aren't viable at this scale. So there's still a lot of research to do. I should also say these tone holes are also undersized, so that I could finish them by hand. I don't think that expanding them out a little bit is going to make the difference and bring it up to pitch, but you know, it could help at least. So let's real quick, I'm going to open up some more tone holes here.
What I'll say while Richard is doing that, just being in the room with the instrument and hearing it to me feels very much like the sound that he was going for in the digitally created videos. It is definitely a bassoon sound. It also feels much more powerful than I think either you or I would have imagined.
Yeah,
because it is loud.
Well, I still think that it's probably, if composers misunderstand it, I still think they're going to misunderstand it on the thinking it's louder than it is side, just like bassoon. I still think it's probably an instrument that's going to be more useful in more exposed. Maybe not necessarily solo, but more exposed.
No, I do not envision this as a solo.
Yeah, you might notice that my friend here, Brett Newton, in his composing 30-something miniatures for woodwinds, left out Subcontrabassoon.
I also left out Alto bassoon and Soprano bassoon. An instrument this low, this is your supporting cast. And I think Richard will absolutely agree with me. You don't hear pitches moving that low without the support of the upper octave.
Yeah, and that actually wasn't that low. That was the G. So that's just a minor third below contrabassoon.
And that is the lowest note that exists in contrabassoon repertoire.
Yes, there is a piece for contrabassoon that includes a low G, Agnogram by Michael Tilson Thomas. There's some wonderful pictures online if you look up Stephen Bronstein. Is it Bronstein or Bronstein? I should really know this. I'm so sorry. If you're listening, I'm so sorry. When he recorded the piece, we were exchanging ideas, and I sending random pieces of plastic across the country so he could play this low G. But here is the less reasonable way to play that low G. Now, I will say one thing I was pleasantly surprised by is it records better than it sounds when you're playing. Like when the reed's in your mouth, it kind of sound you hear a lot of reed sound, like. But it does tend to record a little bit better yet. Lucy, would I play the contrabassoon's lowest B flat on the subcontra? Well, for one thing, the subcontrabassoon actually goes down to low A. Now, right now, we don't have those tone holes plugged, and it would probably take about 30 minutes of fussing to try to get those tone holes plugged. But we do have a recording of it, and I'm going to upload that to my channel separately as soon as we're done. Okay. Matt Miller was just asking about Inventor. I don't know if I should say this. My dad has a metal fabrication and design business. He has Inventor. That's where I learned. So I have access to his Inventor at his shop. So that's where I get my Inventor. Okay. So we have.
I think we've exhausted the Oons.
Yeah,
I don't think we can oon.
You don't think I have a purple 3-octave lower instrument that I made just for this video, like $500 worth of plastic?
Do you?
No. Oh. No. Sorry. I know. For that level of absurdity, your only option is the Giga Racket. But yeah, so it was really exciting this morning, and Brett was here for a lot of it.
Yeah.
To play the first notes of the Subcontrabassoon. It's not. It's really encouraging so far.
It is. I think we can literally say it is not a pipe dream anymore.
I don't have any queued up sound effects. Wait. Can I do a womp womp on this thing?
Nope.
Okay. I keep on hitting the lights.
Yeah. Or it's being touched by angels.
Oh, okay. Okay, that makes more sense. So I think what they're asking is for the same. So what we can do is I can play a low C. Would you mind grabbing that green reed and grabbing the contrabassoon?
How about I grab my contrabassoon?
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So I'm gonna open now. Since this doesn't have all of the tone holes yet, the highest I can play is C1. So that'll be 1, 2, 3 C on the subcontrabassoon, or low C on the contrabassoon.
So what note am I playing?
Low C, but let me...
Just 3-finger C? Or...
No.
Oh, okay.
C below that.
Oop, you get a screw coming out.
Oh, no. It's supposed to be like that. It's one of the nylon ones, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those don't go in all the way.
Okay.
Let's see.
Huh, you have those keys interlocked in your instrument.
Maybe one of these days I'll get comfortable handling this thing, but right now it's still, so much of my life and finances have gone into this thing that just holding it is stressful. Okay. So, now this is going to be out of tune, because as we said, the instrument is overall flat. For reasons I haven't quite determined yet. Maybe it's as simple as the reed. So go ahead and play your low C. Now that is one thing, because the Subcontrabassoon has a shallower taper, it might actually be a little bit easier to hold that note longer.
I'm also really trying to bring it down in pitch, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let me pull out the tuning set.
Okay, so Lucy wants to hear one at a time.
Okay.
Okay. So, anything else to cover? Oh, so importantly, we're going to make this a little bit more of an event, and for tomorrow's stream, where we're going to be discussing some more technical matters of notation, nomenclature, viability for composing. We're going to be doing that stream tomorrow on Brett's channel. There'll be a link to Brett's channel in the description below the VOD. There isn't right now, at least I don't think, but there will be for the VOD. And do we remember what time were we planning that?
I have no clue. You want to do it at 10?
I'm a musician. 10 a.m.? Okay, yeah, 10 a.m. We'll do it at 10 a.m. Tomorrow. So there'll be links to that. Any last questions we have? Okay. Well, and keep in mind, any timbral differences between the instruments right now might be it could be a consequence of the reed. So maybe as I refine my reed making for Subcontrabassoon, that will change. Maybe the instrument will get darker. Maybe it'll get brighter. And you obviously, I would say you want a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
The purpose of a lower instrument like a contrabassoon or a subcontrabassoon, it has a dual function of a practical function of more notes, lower notes, but there's also value in the overlap register of a different timbre.
Yeah, I mean, physically, the low C on this instrument is going to come out of a different, or the actually middle C on this instrument is going to come out of a different place than it is on this instrument. On this instrument, nearly the whole instrument is vibrating. On this one, only half of the instrument is vibrating.
Yeah, and it's also, it's not impossible to imagine that that once the reeds are worked out, that the middle C on the subcontrabassoon will be more flexible and than the low C on the contrabassoon. So maybe someday, 50 years from now, someone has a subcontrabassoon on stage for Alto's Sprach Zarathustra just to play that first. Assuming the instrument might be able to play softer than contrabassoon down there. Maybe, maybe not. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, there was one more question that was kind of interesting. Someone wanted us to play octave Cs.
Oh, so be take like the same, yeah.
Both the same C. Once again, this is going to be out of tune, but you know.
Oh, I'll get it fixed. I can do that.
Wait. Where's the register vent for C? Which one is it? It's these two. I actually do have register vents modeled on this tube. It's kind of funny. I don't have some tone holes, but I have all of the register vents. Let's see if I can get the overblown C to come out. Can you play your C? Yeah, so I'm probably going to need to make those register vents a little bit larger. So it, because you can hear it's hesitant to come out in the upper octave. Okay, well, I think that's going to be it for this stream. Like I said, we're going to have another stream tomorrow, and there's probably going to be some special videos that get uploaded as well.
We have some more shenanigans planned.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much for coming. I hope this has been a enlightening trip through the Oon family, both the common, the less common, and the
absurd.
Well, if for no other reason,
Oons are absurd.
Well, hey, because I made those purple Oons, the subcontrabassoon is not the most absurd instrument in this discussion.
Not the most absurd instrument in this room.
That for no other reason, those instruments have value, and I keep on hitting. Okay, well, once again, thank you all. There'll be a link to Brett's channel for tomorrow's activities. Have a good day. Are you gonna say something?
No.
You don't want them to have a good day?
I guess they can have a good day.
Okay.
If they choose to.
You're allowed. I want you to have a good day. Brett will allow you to have a good day if you want one. See. Okay, neither of us are in a good position to turn off the recording right now, so there's going to be
I'm going to have to.
There's going to be some awkward.
Yeah. Oh, who else is here?
Who? Okay, I think that went well.